All right, welcome everyone. This is a presentation with some general and specific information about applying to fellowships. Specifically, we're going to use the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship as an example, but many of the details that you'll hear specific with respect to this fellowship apply to writing personal statements, proposals, and other fellowships that are at UC Davis or external. The NSF is a great example of a fellowship that is not necessarily giving you a grant for your project, but it's looking at funding a scientist. So the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program has a website with extensive information on it. And again, if this is something you're not planning to apply to next year, it's great to also know about this resource and look up some information related to eligibility, examples, and details associated with this. I will go back and show this slide here. And so Taylor, since I know that you are applying, while this specific review clinic is over, there is a lot of great resources in terms of templates and checklists. So after this presentation, I will copy the links specifically that provide information to see examples of funded fellowship proposals, to get templates about what you should include in a fellowship proposal, in a research summary, in a personal statement. And these are great resources that are available to the UC Davis student community. You have to log in to have access. And then for those of you looking at fellowship applications in the future, the university often has a lot of great resources. Like this was a review clinic that was held recently. So when you're applying in the future, know that especially approximately a month before the deadline, there will often be great resources where you can sign up, get review, and get feedback about the process. Okay, but some of you I know are still interested in thinking about why should you apply. And so the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship, like many fellowships, provides you with funding. In this case, it provides you with 3 years of financial support, but it's an overall 5-year program. In this case, you also have access to other resources, other potential funding or international collaboration opportunities. There's also perks associated with the National Science Foundation, such as career life balance funds associated, for example, with family leave or cyber infrastructure resources. In general, applying to fellowships gets you money. But one of the main reasons you would apply is not just the opportunity for funding, but also kind of the perks, the networking, the visibility. So in many cases, even if you aren't in it for the money, there's other benefits, but typically the funding is one of the primary goals that you might want to consider many of these applications. I do like to say that when you apply for a fellowship, you either get the fellowship or you build the skills and you're at a better starting point so that when you apply to the next fellowship, you're more likely to get that one. So it's kind of a win-win. So I want to mention here the review process. Okay, and this is actually similar to review processes that we use on campus for the Provost Undergraduate Fellowship and for almost any type of fellowship that you're applying towards. This also relates to applying to programs like NSF Camp and MERPS. In general, the review panel is not going to be an expert in your field. It's going to be someone closely related to your field. So whenever you're writing a research proposal or a personal statement, think about appealing not only to someone who's very specific in your research area or your community, but broader interests or broader details. So in the NSF, you're actually assigned panels based on your primary field of study and discipline. So the good news is that means a biologist won't necessarily be reading a chemist, or a physicist won't be reading a biologist. So you can have to refer to very specific elements of the research project that you're interested in. I'd also like to point out these notes about holistic evaluation. Holistic evaluation is actually used for many programs at UC Davis campus, also for NIH and NSF. And what this means is that we're looking at interests and competencies balanced with consideration to experience, attributes, academic achievements, motivation, curiosity. What it means is that we're not just looking at GPA, we're not just looking at, is this the perfect proposal idea? It means we're looking holistically at the entire applicant and the entire package. And what that means is you want to feel comfortable telling your story and including your voice, your passion, your motivation, and your curiosity. So one of the great things about the NSF is they have very specific criteria. These are criteria that are relevant for other fellowships, but for the NSF, they are extremely important. And one has to do with intellectual merit. And that has to do with, are you advancing knowledge? Are you doing something new? Are you learning something new? Are you making something new? And this is also important when considering writing a provost undergraduate fellowship or any type of research that you're interested in. What new knowledge, new materials are going to be gained from the process and from your research efforts? But also thinking about broader impacts. So how well does you, your proposal, or you as an individual benefit society or advance societal outcomes, such as encouraging young children to become excited about science, developing a new material that's more sustainable? So what are the broader impacts to society? And so, for example, if we think about wastewater remediation, if you have dirty wastewater and you're cleaning it up, that has a huge impact on society. So if your research is related to that, that will have broader impacts. Likewise, you could go out and do outreach or tutor and be involved in the community to help teach about science and inspire the next generation of scientists. And that would also help to benefit society. So broader impacts is something that's important in understanding the context or the importance of you as a researcher, why you should receive a fellowship, and why your research should receive funding. And so I do want to point out that when you're thinking about intellectual merit assessment, this also includes thinking about the experience that you've had, some of the academic experiences, your research, your references. In terms of the NSF, it's where you're proposing to go to graduate school and some other components related to this. Excuse me, I was muted for a second. I can make these slides available, and this information is available on the NSF website. But the good news is that there's quite a bit of detail. And I also want to highlight specifically that if you're considering doing research, and if you already have research experience with publications or presentations, these are the things that will help support you in holistically being evaluated as a successful candidate. So it's not only that you were excited to do research, but then you proceeded to communicate that research, to share that research. If you completed a project, you were able to publish that research. So publications and presentations should always be emphasized. So for those of you that have already submitted, or sorry, excuse me, about to submit, you would want to highlight any presentation you've given at UC Davis, externally at a national meeting, and if you have published or if you will publish based on your contributions to a project. For those of you applying to research programs, if you're not yet in a research program, you can also indicate how you want to publish and how you want to present your research, right? All right, in terms of broader impacts, this is where you can think about your prior accomplishments as well as your future plans. And as I mentioned previously, describing your individual experiences and your voice, your story, your perspective, and allowing that to be part of the story and part of the holistic evaluation opportunity. And also, of course, we mentioned the potential benefit to society is a significant part of the broader impacts. Anytime you're writing a personal statement, prior accomplishments and future plans, not just where you've come from, but where you want to go, how you want to give back, how you want to contribute, what you want to discover. These are important components. All right, I'm going to do a few more slides and then I'm going to switch to a little bit of a Q&A format or giving you some specific advice. So I will say one more thing about broader impacts because it is so important. These are actually some of the specific ways in which the NSF considers broader impacts. And there is a very specific and detailed description on the NSF website. But we can think about how well does the research advance discovery and also engage with teaching, training, and learning? How well does it broaden participation of typically underrepresented groups? And this includes women, minorities, students with disabilities, or veterans. So for example, if a veteran chooses to apply to the NSF, that will be recognized as a significant opportunity to enhance and broaden participation, and that is seen favorable in the holistic evaluation process. Also, the broader impacts of how will the research and results be disseminated broadly. So will you present? Again, we talked about presentations, publications, but also this includes outreach. Will you do outreach to local community members? Will you try to explain your research to the public and not just the scientific community? And then, of course, as I've mentioned a few times, the benefits of the proposed activity to society. In general, you're encouraged to apply. And so the biggest thing that keeps someone from not receiving a fellowship is, of course, if they don't apply. Many students are used to trying to get an A or an A+, or thinking in terms of GPA metrics. In many cases, students apply to a fellowship not because they have the perfect idea or think that they're the perfect candidate, but because applying will actually give you constructive feedback if you apply in subsequent years, helps you build an idea or a personal statement. It can be also great preparation for other applications, job applications, writing publications, professional connections. And so even if you think that you will not receive it, it is really important to consider applying. Simply going through the process of applying for any fellowship or internship or research position, for example, writing an email to a professor, will give you better skills and confidence in terms of kind of writing and preparing applications. In the case of the NSF, you're strongly encouraged to apply as an undergraduate student because you can apply once as a senior undergraduate and once as a graduate student. So you'll actually get feedback the first year if you don't get funding that you can apply then to the next year. Many students do get funded their first year as an undergrad, and that's great. But if you choose not to apply, then you kind of lose out on the opportunity to get constructive feedback. I know the senior year is also a really busy year, but even if you have to put something together that's not yet perfect, you still have the benefit of developing from that process. And just so you know, there's about a 12 to 14% success rate. And this is across wide areas of science, as well as various aspects that connect to science fields for the NSF. So this is a pretty decent funding rate. Okay. Okay, at this point in time, I'm going to stop sharing, and I want to have one quick exercise that I like everyone to do when thinking about applying for fellowships or for describing basically things that relate to your personal goals as well as your research. So in the chat, if you can add 3 active verbs that relate to yourself, your research, or your research plan. So for example, you could say, I do research, or I did research. I want to point out that those are not good active verbs because you're not actually taking advantage of the verb. If you wanted to say, I discover, I create, I build, I lead. So one of the things I like everyone to do is brainstorm those power verbs that really help capture what you're doing. Because one of the things I see most often in personal statements and in fellowship, and this includes cover letters or emails to faculty member, is students are actually quite passive about the way they write their statements. I participated in something, or I was given the opportunity. Just as if you were like standing on the side of the road and someone drove by and gave you an opportunity. Usually you want to be more like, no, I flagged down that car, I threw my application at them, I led the way to the next stop. You want to think about a very active verb. So go ahead, if you have access in the chat, to add 3 active verbs that indicate your abilities, your strength related to your research, that you think you would want to include in an application, a letter, or some other similar thing. And I like to make sure that after you've written a rough draft, you go back and you look for all those places where you haven't necessarily been as active in the verbs you use. So if you haven't entered those yet, go ahead and do that. I know everyone's thinking deeply. I'll wait just a second. Great. Lead, innovate, overcome. Great words. Found, learned, explored. Yeah, found, and I would say found, discover is perhaps an even more active scientific term. Discover, explore, pursue. And then we have another innovate, explore, construct. Yeah, and as a scientist, synthesize is also a great word. It's more of a scientific one. Construct would be really good in terms of maybe it's a little less technical, especially if you're talking about constructing molecules. Other ones, design, investigate, evaluate, quantify, teach, share. There's a lot of really good verbs. And so even though this is just a small exercise that translates well to the chat, I want to use that to show the power of the words you use. So in addition to thinking about bringing your holistic self, describing your experiences, really think about the words you use for activities you've participated in, what contributions you've had. Did you lead? Did you contribute? Did you help? Did you share? Like those are the types of things that can be really critical. Okay, at this point in time, since I know we have a broad group of students who some have applied, some are thinking about applying, I'd like to open it up to questions. I'll first open it up to questions that you don't mind being recorded, and then after a few minutes of those questions, I'll wrap up the recording and then open it up to more specific questions or ones that you think of or might not want necessarily recorded. Because I want to make this as useful as possible, given that we have students at different levels. And as I mentioned, if you have already written things, I'm happy to actually read over directly and give you some feedback for your personal statement for the NSF and for your proposal. Okay, so great. Are there any questions? Because again, this was general so far, but I want to try to be able to tailor it to where you are in the process. You can ask that question in the chat or directly. Yeah, go ahead, David.
Okay, so my question was, so like, since I'm a transfer student that just started here at UC Davis last year, sometimes for things like this, I feel like I'm at sort of a disadvantage because at my community college, I never really had the opportunity to do much research. And then especially with the shutdowns, I feel like I just am not very competitive compared to someone that's been at a 4-year the whole time. And so how do you think I could like work that into my like application?
Yeah, so I think you and everyone who's living through the shutdown, which is almost all universities, of course, across the country have shut down and restricted access, especially in certain capacities. It's worth emphasizing that you had already been involved with research and how you remained proactive. I know in your case and many students doing literature searching, maintaining contact with professionals, still practicing science communication and presenting your research. I think we often lose track of the fact that the research experience is not just about being in a lab, mixing or pipetting or stirring or designing, but it's also how you think about critical thinking, communicating, reading and searching the literature, and developing your professional skills. So you would want to emphasize, while even if you haven't gotten to the point where you could publish your research, you can still indicate how you've presented your research, how you've continued to build communication skills. And I would say that even if you feel like you're at a disadvantage, there are many other students who also feel that way. So everyone's kind of in the same boat. You still have strong recommendation letters from being involved with a research position, being involved with programs. If you don't yet have if you don't feel in other cases that you don't feel like you have a strong recommendation letter, this is a good time to build that kind of network and that professional interaction that allows you to get a stronger recommendation letter. So I think one of the things that prevents students from applying is often feeling like you're not as competitive as you want to be, and no one is ever as competitive as they want to be. So being able to push through that and apply, knowing that you're going to get feedback or you're going to develop your skills, and even if you don't get this fellowship, it helps you to get the next fellowship, right? And you still have a compelling story in terms of coming from a community college or transferring in and taking advantage of that research opportunity and taking advantage of, you know, the exploration that can take place at UC Davis. So it's a little bit of a wishy-washy answer, but there is a way to still just be honest and tell your story, say what you have done, what you want to do. And I think that will still carry a lot of opportunity and be fairly convincing to someone who's reading that amongst a lot of other people who are also in similar situations. And I'm happy to talk to you more about that in the future as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, and then a question in the chat. Using someone specifically using a project that they're working on now, how honest would you be about saying you've already completed what you're doing, or if you write the proposal, if you've not done anything yet? All right, so one of the details for writing a proposal, it's often good to have a kind of a big picture goal and then 3 specific aims or 3 objectives, right? And this is a good way to formulate any type of proposal idea, whether it's a provost undergraduate fellowship, an NSF fellowship, your goals for the year related to research. Having kind of 3 tasks, 3 goals is a good opportunity. So in this case for the NSF, what I would probably do is make sure that you have one thing that you haven't yet done. So if there's something that you have done, include that as aim 1, and you can say that you've actually completed it or almost completed it. And then 2 could be half completed, and 3 could be something that's not yet done. So you could add or build on the current work that you're doing to stretch it a little bit further. So you're being mostly honest and you're showing that you can move beyond that. But it's kind of showing that there's a solid foundation, because for any fellowship proposal, you also want to be able to show what you've already accomplished, you know, how you've already done some research, or you've already thought about the research area, how you've already done some outreach, you've already done some communication or critical thinking. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be in the lab. It can be reading the literature, going to research group meetings. Some of those things also count. So David, examples of going to literature group meetings, sorry, not literature, but research group meetings, doing a literature search, those are things that you can specifically indicate as work that you've continued to do while you were not able to be in lab. And does that answer your question, Taylor? Does that give you, okay, great. All right, let's see if there is another question. And then, yeah.
I have a question. So as a transfer student, I just wanted to know, for those fellowship, is that aimed for a senior? Like you just said, you know, you can apply twice, like you can apply, normally people apply at their senior years and then apply another, if you didn't get one, and then you will reapply when you're going for your grad school. So as a junior, are we getting benefits? I mean, definitely we're getting benefits if we apply for that fellowship. But I mean, do we ready, or like, you know, since at this point we haven't got involved in the research project, or, you know, some like opportunities, because I'm still on that point to, you know, seeking the research opportunities. So will be a good time for us to apply as a junior?
Yeah, so if the NSF fellowship is something you apply for your senior year of undergrad and your first year of graduate school. So if you're currently looking for positions, the junior year is a great year to be looking. And of course, this year positions are a little bit on hold while you know, there's restrictions about the number of people that can be in lab. But you can certainly start applying to different labs by emailing faculty directly. And we have a session later this week for Undergraduate Research Week, kind of going through this very specific process of best practices to email faculty members to get research positions. We also have some other workshops that specifically talk about our sponsored research programs like NSF Camp, MERPS, McNair, Murals. And that's where faculty kind of help guide you and support you in the process of looking for research positions as well. And some of those provide funding that is similar to an NSF fellowship, in the undergraduate setting. It's not as much as the graduate fellowship opportunity. So the junior year is a great year. And one thing I want to point out is if you have to write a personal statement or an essay when you apply for these research programs, those personal statements are the foundation or the draft that ends up being what you use for fellowship applications like your NSF fellowship. So that personal statement, writing it, adding to it, seeing it as a living document, getting feedback and edits from people, you're going to want to craft and grow that because it's going to be very applicable. And when you get to the NSF fellowship or other fellowships that are worth $100,000, that means your personal statement will have been polished and you will have kind of been thinking about it along the way. It'll probably still require some crafting and editing, but you will have been working on it along the way.
Thank you.
All right, at this point in time, I'll stop the recording and just so that we have something to put online because I want some people to have some general information, and then I'll continue asking any questions more specifically if you have them.